The moment I realized my family had already decided who I was the moment I stopped trying to correct them. And that decision changed everything. It didn't start with the intervention. It started months earlier, with something small, almost invisible, a laugh. Not loud, not cruel, just dismissive. We were at my parents' house. Sunday dinner. Same table. Same conversations. Same hierarchy. My brother talking about a new deal. My sister scrolling through her phone, half listening. My mom asking polite questions that only had one acceptable answer. And me? I was sitting there quietly, like always. So, what are you doing now? My aunt asked. That question. It sounds simple, but in my family, it's never just curiosity. It's evaluation. I smiled. Still working with startups. There was a pause. Then my brother chuckled. Still doing those tiny equity deals? Tiny. That word again. Not worthless. Not wrong. Just small. Something you don't take seriously. Yeah, I said. He shook his head. I don't get how you're surviving on that. Surviving? Like I was barely holding on. Like I was one bad month away from collapse. The table went quiet. Not uncomfortable. Accepting. Because to them, that version of me made sense. The struggling one. The uncertain one. The one who needed help. And that's when my sister laughed. Not loudly. Just enough. You know, she said, at some point you're going to have to get a real job. A real job. I nodded, smiled, and said nothing. Because I had already learned something important. The moment you try to prove yourself to people who have already decided who you are, you lose. So I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't defend myself. I just watched. Because people reveal more when they think you're not a threat. And that night, they revealed everything. My mom sighed softly. I just don't want you ending up with nothing. There it was. Nothing. The word they always came back to. Not different. Not unconventional. Nothing. And the worst part? They believed it. Completely. That's when I realized something. They weren't underestimating me by accident. They needed me to be this way. Because in their world, everyone had a role. My brother was success. My sister was security. And I was the contrast. The example of what happens when you don't follow the path. And if that changed, their entire narrative would fall apart. So I let them keep it. Because sometimes, the most powerful move you can make is staying underestimated. If you've ever been in that position, hit like right now, because you already know how this ends. But what they didn't know was that everything they believed was already outdated. Because while they were watching appearances, I was watching systems, patterns, opportunities, and more importantly, blind spots. Money isn't about effort. That's the first lie people believe. Money is about access, position, timing. And I had spent years learning all three. Not in a classroom. Not from a job. From observation. From failure. From being invisible. Because when no one expects anything from you, you have the freedom to experiment, to fail quietly, to build without pressure. And that's exactly what I did. It started simple. Freelance work, branding, strategy, small startups, unknown founders, ideas people didn't believe in. Instead of charging high fees, I made a different choice. I asked for equity, tiny percentages, 0.5%, 1%, sometimes less. It sounded insignificant. And that's why people agreed. Because giving away something they didn't think would matter felt easy. And I didn't argue. I didn't push for more. I just collected pieces. Quietly. Consistently. Relentlessly. One company. Then another. Then another. Most of them failed. Of course they did. That's how it works. But a few didn't. And that's all it takes. One unexpected acquisition. One viral product. One funding round that changes everything. And suddenly, those tiny percentages aren't tiny anymore. Their leverage. And leverage changes everything. But even then, I didn't tell anyone. Not my family. Not my friends. No one. Because I wasn't done. And more importantly, because I understood something they didn't. Visibility attracts pressure. And pressure kills growth. So I stayed quiet. Same apartment. Same clothes. Same struggling image. Because it gave me something priceless. Freedom. Freedom to move without being watched. Freedom to build without interference. Freedom to see things others couldn't. Like my brother's company. From the outside, it looked perfect, stable, growing, successful. But I've learned something about perfect. It's usually a performance. And performances have cracks. You just have to know where to look. I started paying attention. Not directly. Subtly. Public data. Industry chatter. Small details most people ignore. Missed targets. Delayed hires. Sudden changes in strategy. Nothing dramatic, but enough. Enough to tell a story. And the story was simple. They were stretched. Not failing. Not yet. But vulnerable. And vulnerability creates opportunity. That's when the idea started forming. Not revenge. Not at first. Something else. Curiosity. What would happen if I stepped into their world without them knowing? If I moved quietly, the way I always had. And so I did. Through funds. Through secondary markets. Through people who never knew my name. I started building a position. Small at first. Then bigger. Then significant. Not enough to control anything. But enough to matter. Enough to be inside. And the entire time, they had no idea. Because in their minds, I wasn't capable of that. And that's the danger of assumptions. They don't just blind you to others. They blind you to risk. By the time they invited me to that dinner, everything was already in motion. The intervention? That was just timing. Perfect timing. Because now, I didn't just understand their perception of me. I understood their weaknesses. And more importantly, I understood their certainty. And certainty is the easiest thing to break. Saturday came. 6 p.m. Same house. Same table. But this time, I wasn't the same person walking in. Not really. Because I knew something they didn't. This wasn't an intervention. This was a setup. They just didn't realize who it was for. If you're still here, don't forget to subscribe because the next part, this is where everything flips. When I walked into that house, they were already seated. That told me everything. People don't sit down before a conversation unless they think it's serious or controlled. And this was both. My brother was at the head of the table. Of course he was. My sister sat to his right, legs crossed, phone face down but within reach. My mom was across from them, hands folded, prepared. Even my aunt was there again. 6 people. Not a dinner. A panel. Evaluating me. I smiled like nothing felt strange. Hey, I said casually. My mom gave me that soft look again. The one that always felt like concern, but never really was. Sit, honey. Honey. She only used that tone when she thought I was fragile. I sat. And just like before, I didn't start the conversation. Because the person who speaks first is usually the one trying to control the outcome. I let them have that. My brother cleared his throat. We're glad you came. Of course you are. Because you think this ends your way. We've been talking, he continued. I nodded. I figured. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. Just for a second. Because I wasn't nervous. I wasn't defensive. I was calm. And calm people are hard to control. He pushed a folder toward me. There are a few things we want to go over. I looked at it. Didn't open it. Not yet. Instead, I asked, is this where you tell me I'm failing? Silence. Not because I was wrong. Because I said it out loud. My sister shifted in her chair. That's not what this is, she said quickly. It was exactly what it was. But people don't like hearing the truth framed that clearly. My brother leaned forward. We're trying to help you. Help. Another word that sounds good until you look at what it actually means. By planning my life for me? I asked.
My mom spoke this time.
We just want you to have stability.
Stability.
In their world, that meant predictable, safe, controlled. I have stability, I said. Now, they looked confused because it didn't match their version of reality. You don't have consistent income, my brother said. There are different ways to create income, I replied. He shook his head. That's exactly the problem. You don't understand structure. I almost smiled. Almost. Because that sentence told me everything. He thought structure only existed inside his system.
Salary.
Hierarchy. Control. He didn't understand leverage. And that's why what came next was inevitable. Open the folder, he said.
So I did.
Inside, exactly what I expected. Job applications. Budget breakdowns. Steps to rebuild financial stability. Rebuild. As if I had something broken. I flipped through the pages slowly. Not because I needed to read them. Because I wanted them to feel the silence. The longer I took, the more uncomfortable they became. Because deep down, they expected resistance. Emotion. Something they could react to. But I gave them nothing. And that made it worse. Finally, I closed the folder, placed it neatly on the table, and said, "This is impressive." Relief. Immediate. My sister exhaled. My mom relaxed slightly. They thought I was agreeing, that I was about to say yes. And then I added, but completely unnecessary. Everything froze again. This time heavier. My brother frowned. What does that mean? It means I don't need this. Now irritation started creeping in. You're not listening, he said. No, I replied calmly. I'm just not agreeing. That's when the energy shifted. Because disagreement? They could handle. But calm disagreement? That breaks control. You're being stubborn, my sister said. Or maybe, I said, you're being wrong. That landed.
Hard.
Because I had never spoken like that before.
Not to them.
Not at this table. And suddenly,
they weren't sure who they were talking to. Good.
That's exactly where I wanted them. If you're still watching, this is the moment everything starts to flip, so hit like if you can feel the tension building. My brother leaned back. Okay, he said slowly. Then explain. There it was. The opening. But I didn't take it.
Not yet.
Because timing matters. And they weren't ready. Instead, I said, I will.
Pause.
But first, I want to understand something. They looked confused again. When did you decide I was failing? Silence. Because that question wasn't part of their script. My mom hesitated. We didn't. Yes, you did, I said gently. No anger. Just precision. You planned this. You discussed it. You built a solution. I tapped the folder. That doesn't happen unless you've already decided there's a problem. No one spoke. Because again, I wasn't wrong. My sister looked down. My brother avoided eye contact for the first time. And my mom just looked tired. That's when I said something they didn't expect. I don't blame you. That caught them off guard.
Completely.
Because they were ready for conflict. Not understanding. You saw what I showed you. I continued. You saw the surface. And that's all they ever looked at. Surface. Appearances. Signals. Never systems. Never depth. Never what was actually happening underneath. And that's why they missed everything. I reached into my bag.
Slowly.
No sudden movements. Because this moment needed control. And then I placed it on the table. A thin folder. Smaller than theirs. But heavier. Because this one was real. My brother looked at it. Suspicious. What's this? He asked. My version, I said. He opened it. At first, nothing changed. Just numbers. Documents. Then his eyes slowed. Focused. Locked in. Because he started recognizing things. Companies.
Deals.
Structures. Not random. Not small.
Strategic.
His expression shifted. From confidence to confusion, to something else, something quieter.
Concern.
My sister leaned over. "What is that?" she asked. He didn't answer, because he was still processing, still recalculating everything he thought he knew. And that's when I said it.
Calm.
Simple. "I've been investing." Understatement. Deliberate. Because the truth would hit harder in pieces. My mom frowned. "In what?" I met her eyes. "In things you didn't notice." That line landed differently. Because it wasn't just about money. It was about attention.
About what they chose to see.
My brother flipped another page. Then another. Faster now.
Searching.
For a mistake. There wasn't one. "How much is this?" he asked quietly. There it was again. The question they always ask. The number. Because in their world, numbers define truth. I leaned back and said, "Enough to not need your help." Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. My sister shook her head. "This doesn't make sense." Of course it didn't. Because their entire understanding of me was built on incomplete data.
And now?
It was collapsing.
Slowly.
Painfully. In real time. But I still wasn't done. Because this wasn't the real reveal. This was just the beginning. The part where they realize they were wrong. The next part is where they understand how wrong. I stood up. Not to leave.
Not yet.
Just to change the energy. Because sitting keeps things small. Standing changes the dynamic. And now, I was done being small. "There's something else you should know," I said. My brother looked up immediately. Alert. Tense. Because now, he understood this wasn't over. And that's when I said the one thing that shifted everything again. I didn't just invest randomly.
Pause.
I invested strategically. His eyes narrowed. Because now, he was starting to see it, starting to connect things. But he wasn't there yet. So I helped him. Just a little. "I've been paying attention to your company." Silence. Instant. Because now, this wasn't abstract anymore. This was personal. "What?" he said. I didn't look away. Public data. Market shifts. Performance signals. Each word. Precise. Measured. Controlled. "You've been expanding too fast," I added. That hit. Because it was true. And he knew it. "You don't know what you're talking about," he snapped. There it was. Emotion. Finally.
And emotion?
Means pressure. "I know enough," I said calmly. And then I delivered the line. That changed everything. "I'm already inside." Silence. Not confusion this time. Recognition. Because now, he understood. And the moment he understood, everything shifted. "I'm already inside." The words didn't sound loud. But they didn't need to. Because the moment I said them, everything in the room changed. My brother didn't blink. Didn't move. He just stared at me, trying to calculate something. And for the first time in his life, he didn't have enough information. "What does that mean?" he asked slowly. Not aggressive. Careful. Because now, he understood this wasn't a conversation anymore. This was leverage. I didn't answer immediately. Because timing is everything. Instead, I let the silence stretch. Let him sit in it. Feel it. Because uncertainty is pressure. And pressure reveals truth. Finally, I said, "It means I own part of your company." My sister let out a short, sharp laugh. "No, you don't." Denial. The fastest defense. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on him. Because this wasn't about convincing her. He already knew. Or, at least, he suspected. "How much?" he asked. There it was again. Always the number. But this time, the number meant something else. Power. "Enough to be in the room," I said. That answer hit harder than any percentage. Because he understood exactly what it meant. Board access. Voting influence. Visibility. Everything he thought was protected wasn't. "That's not possible," he said. But his voice wasn't steady anymore. Because he was already replaying things. Funding rounds. Investor lists. Unexpected entries. He was looking for me, in places he never thought to check. You should really pay more attention to your cap table, I said calmly. That was it. That was the moment. The exact second, everything collapsed. Because now, he knew, not guessed.
Knew.
And the look on his face? It wasn't anger. It wasn't even fear. It was something worse. Realization. The kind that comes too late. He started, then stopped. Because he didn't know what to say. And that's the thing about control. It only works when you think you have it. The moment you lose it, you don't even know how to respond. My mom spoke next.
Softly.
What are you saying? I turned to her. And for the first time that night, my voice softened too. I'm saying, I'm not who you think I am. That hit her differently. Because for her, this wasn't about business. This was about identity. About the version of me she believed in. And that version
Was gone.
My sister leaned forward. So, what? You got lucky, she said. There it was. Another defense. Minimize it. Reduce it. Make it accidental. I smiled slightly. If that helps you understand it, I said. But we both knew it didn't. Because luck doesn't build structure. Luck doesn't create positioning. Luck doesn't place you inside a company. No one thinks you understand. My brother finally stood up.
Fast.
Sharp. You've been watching me, he said. Not calm anymore.
Good.
Because now, we were getting somewhere. I've been paying attention, I corrected. That's not the same thing. It is when you're using it, he snapped. I tilted my head slightly. Using what? He didn't answer. Because he didn't have one. Not a real one. And that's when I said something that shifted the entire tone again. I didn't do anything to you. Silence. Because that's the part people don't expect. They expect aggression.
Attack.
Revenge. But this was different. I didn't sabotage you. I continued. I didn't interfere. I didn't manipulate anything. I let each sentence land. I just saw an opportunity. And took it. That's it. That's all. But sometimes, that's enough. My brother ran a hand through his hair. Frustrated.
Cornered.
Because he couldn't argue with that. Not logically. And logic was the only ground he knew how to stand on. So, what do you want? He asked. There it was. The assumption that this was about something. That I came here to take something.
To demand. To win.
I shook my head. I don't want anything.
Confusion again.
Because that didn't fit. You're in my company, he said. You obviously want something. I held his gaze.
Steady.
No, I said. I wanted to see something.
Pause.
And now I have. That unsettled him more than anything else. Because now, he couldn't predict me. And unpredictability is the opposite of control. If you're still here, this is the moment everything truly flips. Comment flip if you see it. I took a step back, creating distance. Because the moment was already won. There was nothing left to prove. But I gave them one more thing. Not out of necessity. Out of clarity. You all thought I had nothing, I said. No anger. No bitterness. Just truth. You planned my future. You analyzed my life. You tried to fix me. I looked at each of them, one by one. But you never asked what I was actually doing. Silence. Because they hadn't. Not really. They had assumed. Filled in the blanks. Built a version of me that made sense to them. And never questioned it. That's not on me, I said quietly. And that line, that was the real ending. Not the money. Not the company. Not the reveal.
That.
Because that's where responsibility shifts. From being misunderstood to them choosing not to understand. My mom looked down. My sister didn't speak. My brother just stood there. Still processing. Still trying to rebuild a reality. That made sense again. But he couldn't. Because the truth had already replaced it. And truth doesn't negotiate. I picked up my bag. Not rushed. Not dramatic.
Just done.
I appreciate the concern, I said. And I meant it. Because without it, this moment wouldn't exist. But then I added, next time don't assume you know the full picture. No pause this time. No dramatic exit. Just movement. Forward. Out of the room. Out of the version of me they had created. And into something else. Something real. Behind me, no one followed. No one spoke. Because there was nothing left to say. And that's the thing about power. Real power. It doesn't need the last word. It doesn't need validation. It doesn't need to explain itself. It just is. A week later, I attended my first board meeting. Same company, different position. And when my brother walked in, he looked at me differently. Not with authority. Not with judgment. With awareness. Finally.
And that was enough.
Because I didn't need to win. I didn't need to dominate. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I had already done the most important thing. I let them fully believe the version of me they created, and then I replaced it with reality. Quietly.
Completely.
And permanently. If you made it this far, subscribe, because stories like this aren't about money. They're about perception. And perception is the most valuable currency there is. So tell me in the comments, would you have revealed everything earlier? Or waited like I did? Because sometimes, the strongest position you can be in is the one no one sees coming.